Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with a video. It is Sunday evening here in Chiang Mai, Thailand, December 14th, 2025. And I'm a kind of a, I don't know what it is with me, but I like thinking about things, and I like making connections between different aspects of things that don't necessarily people don't necessarily think about. So this is what I'm talking about. Right now in Europe, we have a backdrop of an incipient act of financial piracy, we can say, where the European Commission has decided that they don't care what international law says or what anybody says, what the IMF says, what Japan says, what the United States says. They get it into their heads that Russia is bad and we need to steal their assets and give them to poor little innocent Ukraine, and overlooking the fact that the poor little innocent Ukraine is a monster created by the United States and the West in the wake of World War II, when the U.S. CIA basically backed the Stefan Bandera and some of his other cohorts in creating massive atrocities during World War II as they collaborated with the Nazis. And of course, following the end of World War II, the Soviet Union was able to stamp out Stefan Bandera. Some KGB agent assassinated him, but they also captured all of the guerrillas who had been left behind and financed and helped by the West following the end of following the end of World War II. They were fighting a guerrilla war actually in Ukraine, and the Soviet Union was able to either kill or imprison them. But in 1953, I believe it was, after the death of Stalin, Khrushchev, who had taken over from Stalin, had this idea in his head that he was going to call an amnesty, and when he did that, these Ukrainian Nazis, got released from prison, and they harbored this ancestral hatred towards Russia, and also the Europeans themselves have had this long-standing resentment towards Russia. I mean, there's a reason why the Teutonic Knights in 1242, the year 1242, invaded Russia, and it was Alexander Nevsky who was the great, one of the first real great heroes of Russia, of the Russian civilization state, was able to drive them out. And then I think Charles of Sweden, he invaded this. The Russians kicked them out. The Poles came in. They got kicked out, and then of course in 1812, Napoleon goes in with not just French but other European troops, and he went in with an army of several hundred thousand, and 40,000 came back. So that didn't work out. And then, of course, in 1917, in World War One, the Germans invaded Russia. That was a big mistake. Russia getting involved in World War One. Several tens, several. I think probably about 20 million people, and many of these were young men in Europe who were sent to their deaths by their leaders in what I would call a vainglorious attempt to prove how cool they were in defeating their counterparts, whether the British against the Germans or the French against the Germans or the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And so it was like a war of all against all to kind of mirror the idea of the Game of Thrones that we saw, decades later. Following World War One, this a very important German author who's been referred to several times recently, and I've been talking about this myself. A guy named Oswald Spengler talked about the decline of the West. And he was saying that even though the Western civilization in Europe and so on was kind of the pinnacle of human civilization at that time, the World War One was like it was a big warning signal that Europe was actually and Western civilization was actually declining. And then, of course, the very faulty um, peace negotiations in Versailles was basically caused tremendous chaos in Germany, and that led to, of course, the rise of Hitler. And Hitler himself was he got a lot of help from the West, because the West had this idea that one way to get rid of the Russians, not just the Soviet Union, but Russia as a civilization, which they have this inherent hatred for, was to arm and train the Germans. But that failed also. And of course, that plan, it failed in spades, because when Hitler got it into his head that he wasn't going to just take over Russia, he was going to take over all of Western Europe, and even attempted to take over England. That failed. But of course, it failed much because the Russians, with the help of England at that time, it was a marriage of convenience, you could say. When the Germans attacked the Soviet Union, England helped the Soviet Union, because they realized that by diverting German attention towards Russia, it was kind of giving England some breathing space. But after the Soviets defeated Germany, it was back to business as usual. And Winston Churchill immediately flipped from Stalin's my friend to now Stalin's my enemy. What is going on with these people, that they have this ongoing habitual hostility towards Russia? What is that about? So that's the question I have. And so this brings to mind a couple of themes that I want to talk about. The first was during the 1970s, or I think it was actually, I just was checking online. There was a movie called Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, and this movie, let me read to you what it's about, because I remember the title. The title itself is very haunting. Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors. Think about the implications of that. Shadows of for forgotten ancestors. The shadows of them. So this is an AI generated. They helped out with this. Saved me a lot of research time. Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors was directed by Sergei Parajanov and released in 1965. So this is a Soviet era movie, and this is significant, because you see the people so part of the same problem. They so underestimate the Russian mentality. And here's a movie that is it's very evocative. I remember it to this day. It says, this movie, released in 1965, is a visually stunning film that explores themes of love, fate, and the influence of ancestral heritage within a Carpathian mountain setting. Carpathian Mountain is like around the area of Hungary, and I think maybe Romania, and current Ukraine, actually. Um, so the plot follows the tragic love story of Ivan and Marichka, two young lovers from rival families. Rival families. Their romance is deeply impacted by the traditions and superstitions of their Hutzul culture, reflecting the powerful influences of family, community, and the past. As the story unfolds, the film showcases Ivan's grief and struggle after Marichka's untimely death, portraying how the shadows of their ancestors, through cultural rituals, customs, and unresolved family conflicts, shape his actions and emotions. The film employs striking visuals, rich symbolisms, and a nonlinear narrative style, emphasizing spiritual and cultural connections to the character's lineage. The lessons from the film: the power of ancestral influence. Let that sink in. The film highlights how the past can haunt individuals, and the way ancestral legacies, both positive and negative, shape personal identities and destinies. This is think about, do you see any kind of movie that talks about this in the West nowadays? Cultural memory. It underscores the importance of cultural traditions and memories, suggesting that understanding one's heritage can be both a source of strength and a burden. This is phenomenal that they see these things in their complexity. Love and loss. The themes of love and loss serve as a reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring impact of grief on individuals. And I can tell you, as somebody who lost his father when I was 8 years old and he was only 35, it still has an impact on me. Cultural conflict and reconciliation. The rivalry between families illustrates the destructive nature of enmity and the importance of seeking reconciliation to break free from the cycles of vengeance and sorrows. Overall, Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors resonates with the idea that coming to terms with the shadows of our past is essential for personal growth and healing, making it a profound exploration of human emotions and ancestral connections. What an incredible movie. I mean, to see a movie like this, can we learn anything from watching movies like this instead of, Captain America or these nowadays, the younger generation, they're captivated by cartoons, with it's ridiculous. It's pathetic, the level of the sinking consciousness of modern society. And this was from 1965. Okay, now my next question was, can you make a connection between the lessons of that movie and the German tragic epic, The Nibelungenlied, and today's European crisis? Does Europe need to come to terms with its centuries of antagonism towards Russia? That's my question. Now, I majored in German in university, and the Nibelungenlied was an epic poem about, you could say, familial and interfamilial rivalry and revenge and that sort of thing. And the story ends with essentially a battle where everybody kills everybody. They all die in a blaze of glory, as if dying for what? Because they weren't able to just reconcile, be friends. What is going on here? And the thing that really disturbs me about that particular epic is that to me, this is just my opinion, to me it appears that there's this murderous and suicidal attitude that is affecting the leadership of the European Union, that wants a war with Russia that they cannot win. But they have this, it seems like, an ancestral hatred and need to be at war and be enemies with Russia for no reason at all that I can see. I mean, just in terms of their energy supplies. The Soviet Union, the evil Soviet Union, was sending gas and oil to the European Union, to Germany, at very reasonable prices, to Poland at very reasonable prices. And they suddenly decide Russia's bad and we don't want your oil anymore and we want to take you down. What is the rationality about all this? There's no rational reason. For me, this is the shadows of forgotten ancestors. They've never been able to overcome that psychological seed of psychopathy and obsessive compulsive hatred towards this particular geographical area with its people. What is going on with that, and what is the consequence? So I asked the question about the Nibelungenlied and the connection between that and Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors. Is something that we can learn from both of these epics. And it says, the lessons from Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors and the themes in Nibelungenlied and the current European crisis can be interconnected through the concepts of ancestral legacies, conflict, and the need for reconciliation. The connections. 1. Ancestral legacies and conflict. Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors emphasize how the past, including familial and cultural shadows, influences characters' behaviors and choices, often leading to tragedy. The Nibelungenlied, a German epic, showcases themes of betrayal, vengeance, and the destructive nature of pride among noble bloodlines. Noble bloodlines like, the czars of Russia and the king of England and the czar of Germany and the emperor of Austro-Hungary, Hungarian Empire. That kind of noble bloodlines, pride and desire for revenge and so on. The cycle of revenge among the characters leads to a cascade of violence and suffering, illustrating how unresolved conflicts can resonate through generations. Today's European crisis reflects historical antagonism and unresolved tensions within Europe, particularly between different nations and ideological divides, which can trace back centuries, influencing current geopolitical dynamics. Now, you can say what you want about AI, but they nail this really well here, and they articulated something. They articulated what I've been thinking, but didn't take the time to formulate in my own words. But it's so good that I'm repeating what they have to say. Okay, the second aspect, the second connection is the cultural memory and identity. Both films highlight the importance of cultural identity and memory. Just as the characters in both works grapple with the weight of their heritage, modern Europe must contend with its historical narratives, especially regarding its complex relationship with Russia. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine and tensions with Russia evoke this legacy of mistrust and conflict among European countries. The need to understand and perhaps, like have to, um, uh, um, I lost my place here. Um, The ongoing conflict in Ukraine and tensions with Russia evoke this legacy of mistrust and conflict among European countries. The need to understand and perhaps reevaluate these narratives is crucial for going forward. 3. Reconciliation. The lessons from the characters' experiences in both narratives emphasize the necessity of reconciliation. In Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors, Ivan's journey reflects a struggle for healing from loss, while the downfall of characters in the Nibelungenlied serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of failing to resolve conflicts. Very important. For Europe today, engaging in genuine dialogue and reconciliation with Russia it must be crucial. Instead of allowing historical grievances to dictate actions, a more constructive approach may facilitate better relations. Current crisis. The European crisis, heightened by the aftermath of the Cold War and more recent conflicts, exemplifies the ongoing struggle with historical legacies, both in terms of nationalism and the need for cooperative approaches to shared challenges. Acknowledging and addressing the long-standing antagonism towards Russia, along with seeking mutual understanding and cooperation, might be essential steps for Europe to foster stability and peace moving into the future. Conclusion. In summary, Europe's need to confront its historical antagonisms, particularly regarding Russia, resonates with the themes presented in both Shadows of Forgotten Ancestors and the Nibelungenlied. Learning from the past is vital to avoid repeating cycles of conflict and to build a more unified and peaceful future. Reconciliation and understanding must be prioritized to heal historic wounds and create a platform for cooperation. Now, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into this because the Nibelungenlied is a German epic, and what I find interesting is that you have this German epic about war, and where it's like the glory of everybody killing each other. It's like a collective obsessive compulsive need for omnicide and mutual suicide. This is a psychological, aberration, to say the least. Now, I compare that with two epics from India. One of them is called the Ramayana, and the other one is called the Mahabharata. And Jeff Rich who's an excellent historian. He has a Substack. I recommend that you visit him. He did a series on the Mahabharata. I had a kind of interaction with him recently, and we were talking about this. And he points out that the Mahabharata is a complex story. It's where there are it's a complicated um, series of relationships where there's not necessarily good guys or bad guys. It's more ambiguous, you might say. Whereas in Ramayana, it talks more about um, um, the acts of virtue and good karma and not good karma, but why it's important to do good things and don't do bad things, that sort of thing. What I thought was interesting is in um, Chinese folklore, you have the Monkey King, um, but that's like a completely fantasy kind of thing. Whereas in Confucianism, now in Confucius time, there were wars going on everywhere in China, and he was this guy he was like a teacher who was going around attempting to be a political consultant to these people and trying to get them to kind of learn to get along with each other, that sort of thing. But he not with not great success, I might add. But he lived a long life, relative for that time, pretty long life, I think into his 70s. And at the end of his life, and he had some devoted students who kept his teachings. And after he died, his students furthered his teachings, and eventually they realized, gee, this guy really had something going for him, and he became, I would say, probably the bedrock of Chinese culture. The other person who was also contemporary with him was Lao Tzu. And Lao Tzu was this old guy who was traveling around China, and he was known for being a very, very wise, really cool old guy. And even Confucius met him, and he thought, yeah, Lao Tzu is a really, really cool person. And so there, you had a kind of parallel, not a belief system, but just kind of a way of thinking called Taoism. The Tao means the way, how things are. And the idea is that how can we be in harmony with the way things are? That's the idea. In Hinduism, you have the word dharma, which means the law or how things are, or it can also mean a fact. It's got different meanings for that word. It's fairly complicated, complex. But the point was that Taoism and Confucianism are both talking about how do we live in harmony? That's the question. And then uh, Hinduism in India proceeds for a couple of thousand years, and then eventually there's a prince in India who he was destined to be a king, but he gave that up because he had deeper questions that he needed answers, and he eventually really became very good at meditation, and he became what is known as the Buddha, or the awakened one. And so Buddhism developed in India, had a huge impact on Indian culture and development. In parallel with Hinduism, which is Hindus often think of Buddha as you could say, a son of Hinduism. And eventually, what happened there was that there was a king in India named Ashoka, and there's a movie about him which is really, really quite interesting. It's an Indian Bollywood type movie, but it's very instructive because in this movie, Ashoka is presented as this young guy who is treated really poorly, and then he comes back. He fights back against I think his brothers, who kind of try to kill him and usurp the throne, and he eventually gets the throne back, and so he becomes the ruler of the area of India he was in, and he basically, I think, seeks revenge and starts fighting with all the the surrounding kingdoms. But what happened was that while he was in exile, he falls in love with this beautiful young woman who is also in a similar predicament, where she was a princess of a country, and she is kicked aside, and she's living in exile, just as Ashoka is, and so he falls in love with her, and then they part, and then he's back. He gets his throne back, and she somehow gets her throne back. But she's actually, I think, in the case of her country, it was a democracy, whereas in Ashoka's situation, he was the king of his realm. But so they, but meanwhile, Ashoka is the king of his country, and um, he his I think either his first wife dies. He meets this Buddhist woman, and he takes her on. I think she was a widow, and she's considered kind of, you don't marry widows, but for some reason he decides to marry her, and he she has a good she becomes a good influence for him, and so, but in any case, he decides to go to war with this neighboring kingdom. And he's right at the verge. He's basically wiped everybody out. And he's on the battlefield. And who's the last person standing is his old lover. And he goes, "Oh my God, what have I been doing? I've been causing all this terrible suffering for what?" And he says, "No more, no more wars. I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to spread peace and kindness and wisdom. That's what I'm going to do." And that's exactly what he did. He Throughout Asia, he sent Buddhist monks out, and they were basically spreading, teaching how to meditate, and he spread, there was many um, Buddhist text with a lot of, very wise teaching in them, and that was what he did. And the reason why Thailand is a Buddhist country now is because of these Buddhist monks that um, became emissaries, you might say, for awakening. So why do I bring all this stuff up? It's because in the East there's this what I call non-dualistic thinking. It's a way of looking at the world where you don't see things in black and white terms, or as we call them in philosophy, Manichaean terms, where it's good against evil. Things are more nuanced in Eastern thinking, and that's true also in Europe, in Russia. Russia, although it is a European culture, it does have this aspect of non-dualistic thinking. So, and the reason why I say that, a good example of that, is that when the European colonialists and imperialists went throughout the world, in the Anglo-Saxons, they went to North America. In Canada, they wiped out the Native American populations. They basically, put the kids into schools and hit them if they spoke their native languages. The same thing in the United States. They wiped out 90% of the population of the Indians, and England went to India. Millions of Indians were killed because of the way the British stole all the wealth from India, drove the country into poverty. And the Germans were in Namibia, and they committed genocide there. But when the Russians went through they spread their territory again, starting with Kiev, actually, which was the core of where Russian civilization started, and then it spread to its sister city, Moscow. And Moscow then became kind of the center of it, but Kiev was always considered part of the Rus, the Russian culture. Um, so so that's basically what happened with Russia, and so it hasn't, as it spread throughout Asia. Yes, it conquered a huge territory, and people of many different ethnic groups, Muslims, Yakuts, Mongols, and they got along. And like I went to the city called Irkutsk in it's in Siberia, And fortunately, it was summertime, so it wasn't really cold. They told me, you got to come back. It's too hot here right now. It's 80 degrees, Fahrenheit, 30 degrees centigrade, and but you got to come. It's great here in the winter. It's minus 20, but it's dry cold, so it's really very comfortable. You'll love it. Come on back here, I think. Okay, sure, yeah, thanks a lot, but no thanks. I'll stay in Thailand where it's 80 degrees right now. But anyway, the point is that you have ethnic Russians in Irkutsk, you have Mongols in Irkutsk, you have Central Asian people, Islamic peoples, and they seem to get along okay. What is the problem? Why can't people just get along? In the West, they don't know how to get along with people. We're superior, and everybody has to do it our way because we're right and you're wrong. This is Manichaean thinking. So that's where it comes down to this problem of this shadows of forgotten ancestors, where these kinds of innate ideas of right and wrong and superiority and inferiority, and also and tied up with this apparent um, uh, drive towards mutual suicide and killing each other as if that's some kind of glorious act. That's what really concerns me. Actually, is that the West has this unresolved difficulty, this unresolved problem where they don't know how to truly, sincerely reconcile. Now we have this situation with the national security strategy, and they're kind of like talking about it. Well, let's get along, but they haven't really dug into themselves. They haven't introspected themselves to see what are we doing? What is this antagonism? Are we really sincerely um, trying to reconcile with Russia and China and the rest of the world? They're not trying to do that. They're using what they're doing is they're taking a strategic um, retrenchment, you could say, and just as they did in the 1970s with the Soviet Union, said, "Okay, yeah, let's bury the hatchet. Let's make some peace treaties and anti ballistic missile treaties, and let's get along." And then 10 years later, boom, they're back to fighting again. So this is the problem that the West has. They really need to come to grips with a real crack in their consciousness. That's basically what I want to talk about in this video, and why I point out the fact that when people and whole cultures have these unresolved conflicts within themselves, which they project onto other people and cause wars after wars after wars. It's never going to resolve themselves because the problem is within them. It is not China's problem. It's not Russia's problem. It's not Venezuela's problem. It's not Cuba's problem. It's our problem. We Westerners have this mentality that we really need to come to terms with our own murderous impulses and learn to get along with people. So that's what I got to say about this, and I hope that using these kinds of cinematic um, allegories, people can kind of come to grips with these things so that we can overcome them and avoid a complete catastrophe, which Europe seems to want to do. That's what's going on. So thanks again for listening. Again, if you want to support my channel, you can do so. I recently posted an item. Um, Let your life be a friction upon the machine, with a guy named Paul Edwards, and it's so powerful because it raises this kind of issue, the very deep psychological conditioning that we in America have, the myths that we are living in, which we are slaves to essentially. And so I got in contact with him, and I republished his very, very helpful documentary. And so I just want to say thank you to all of you who do either contribute to my channel, or who share the information that I'm giving you, or comment, or anything. Give me a like, anything to let me know that you're out there and you kind of appreciate what I'm doing. So thanks again for listening, and I will talk to you again soon.